It's time to set the record queer. Making a t-shirt is easy. All you need is 2 graphics programs, $500 worth of equipment, and 10 years of experience.
Welcome, listeners, I say, before proceeding to take a sip from the water bottle positioned on my custom Setting the Record Queer coaster to Setting the Record Queer podcast, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is episode 6, and it's about professional crafting. My name's Alexis, my pronouns are it, its, and she, her, and I'm one of your hosts.
I'm your other host. My name is Kaylee, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, Kaylee.
Hi. Alexis, the world is ending, and it's ending with us. Co-op.
With us? Co-op.
Co-op.
Good job. That was stellar.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell me about this hot meme that you got sent to your phone that you just told me about?
Okay, well, the two of us, what we've spent our last week doing or so is we have picked up The World Ends With You, the new Switch port, as a speedrun together, which is the first time we've done a co-op run since Fire Emblem Warriors.
This is a much better co-op run. It actually has, interesting speed tech and, is a good speedrun. This was also my first time ever playing The World Ends With You, and I'm just, absolutely enamored with the game. I love how literally everything about it is aggressively stylish, according to the definition of stylish from, the early 2000s image of the late 90s. It's really good, and it's a really fun game and fun speed game.
So, Alexis, you are preparing tomorrow, and this will be in the past, but you are preparing to go off to California tomorrow, so we're recording this a bit earlier than we usually do.
Yep, that is correct. This weekend I am going to be at Games Done Quick Express at TwitchCon on the other side of the country in California. I am going to be running one of my favorite video games, The Girl and the Robot, and by the time you listen to this podcast, I'll have already done the run. I got world record on stage. Everyone gave me a standing applause. The house was full despite the fact that the run was at 5 in the morning, and I got hired to an esports team because of how good I did. That's what happened for sure. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited. I'm not looking forward to traveling all the way across the country, but I'll get through it. Yeah, so that's what's coming up for me. I hope it goes well. I'm nervous.
If that's not what happened, please correct your timeline.
I absolutely will not.
I talked about this on the last couple episodes, but Speedrun Ragnarok, the big Valkyries event, happened. We raised about $9,000 for Take This.
What was your original goal?
It was 1,500.
Good job.
It was pretty ridiculous.
That's only 6 times that. Good job.
Speaking of Speedrun Ragnarok, we have one of the other Valkyries here with us.
Hello.
Hi, who are you?
Hi, I am SchalaKitty. My pronouns are she, her. I am a professional crafter and also new to the world of speedrunning, but I've been involved in fandoms for about as long as I can remember.
Hi, Schala. It's nice to have you on the podcast.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm very excited. I've actually went back and listened to all the other episodes in preparation for this.
Oh no, now we have a reputation to uphold. Why'd you do that?
Also so I could drop in continuity references.
Oh, look at you. You really came prepared. I guess I would not expect anything less from someone who describes themselves not only as a crafter, but a professional crafter. So why don't we roll right into that? What does it mean to be a professional crafter?
A lot of it is that people will pay me to make things for them, is pretty much the long and the short of it. There's a number of ways you can go about being a professional crafter, and there's a couple different sort of spheres I've identified in the greater DIY community. So you have sort of the very traditional people who like traditional themes and traditional methods, and then I found that there's very much a punk DIY kind of sensibility subset that comes out in some smaller different crafting events. For example, I live outside Atlanta, and we just had the Halloween festival, which has a big sort of punk crafter element to it. And then you have what I call the Artist Alley set. That's where I kind of fit in as people who do fan merch based off of different games or anime or TV series, and they're a long-standing part of the conventions And also now it's a big thing to sell online as well. And then finally, you kind of have makers. That's people who might use products and techniques like 3D printing, laser cutting, CNC machines. And it's very also tied into sort of like hacking and Raspberry Pi, kind of like small computing. So there's a lot of different stuff you can do. And kind of all kind of intertwines in this sort of very interesting overlapping Venn diagram of different techniques and attitudes towards crafting.
Cool. That's a lot. I was you said that's the long and short of it, and then proceeded to spend several more minutes on the long of it. So color me impressed.
Oh, thank you. I tried to be thorough.
What all do you do then? What are your, you mentioned this whole big Venn diagram. Which bubbles could I connect by writing like SchalaKitty in the in-between zones?
Definitely Artist Alley for sure. So that's people who do like the fan merch. That's a lot of what I do. I do t-shirts, I do stationery, and I do a number of vinyl decorated items like tumblers and license plates and coasters and keychains. I also kind of fall into the maker category because I do this all with a secondary device. I have a Silhouette Cameo. So there's like a couple different cutting machines that are available at the sort of the personal use level. And the Silhouette Cameo is the one that I have. I actually have two of them. I have an older one that I do for like smaller projects. And then I have like my main current one that I do pretty much all my vinyl cutting on. And then in addition to that, I also have a heat press. So I can do all of my shirts and have them come out looking really good. So that's kind of where I fit into the greater kind of crafting community.
So I've taken a look here at your website, craftedwithzeal.net.
Yes, that's my portfolio site.
I've just got to say, there are a lot of very impressive things here.
Thank you.
So the link for this will be in the show notes. So if you want to take a look at this, and you should take a look at this, you should definitely check these out. There's things here ranging from these like Paper Mario cardstock sprites that look fantastic. Mm-hmm. There's Peach Shadowbox. I don't know, admittedly, some of these franchises, but...
well, some of them are a little odd. Like one of the big projects there was the Temple of the Lava Bear Shadowbox, which that was a small D&D podcast that I then did a Shadowbox for, because it was for Desert Bus for Hope, which is run by Loading Ready Run, and Loading Ready Run did the podcast Temple of the Lava Bear, so it all kind of tied in together. But I'm absolutely happy to answer questions about any of the pieces I've made.
I think we'll get to a lot of the cool stuff that you've made down the line in the podcast. We'll get there, I promise. I'm excited for it. I hope you are too. But first, let's talk about your history. How long have you been doing all of this crafting stuff, and where did these different practices and techniques start to come into your review?
So I've always been crafting things. I'm very, very, very lucky. My mom and my aunt, they basically raised me on crafting in video games. I was super duper lucky that they were also into JRPGs, and for a long time, games like Dragon Warrior, now Dragon Quest, and Final Fantasy, those were like my bedtime stories growing up. And then we would often spend weekends doing different types of crafts. And they also had me go through, I had like an after school program that I went to. And I was that really artsy, annoying kid that would steal all the Legos from everybody else and then make like ridiculous Lego structures.
Oh, wow. Same. Actually, same. Big same.
Actually, I really liked Better Blocks. So there you go. That's going to 100% date me for anyone who actually remembers what Better Blocks were.
I got nothing.
They were a mid-90s Lego offshoot, but the big thing is that they had hinges on the blocks, so you could like make more complicated things. So I used to make like cats and dogs and birds out of Better Blocks. So art has always been like a part of my life. You know, I was the kid who was like in art club and in band and in drama all growing up. As far as crafting professionally goes, it's been around a decade now. I got started when I was in college. I had other friends who would go to sell stuff at artist alleys at different conventions. And I was like, oh, that's really cool, you know, and can I help out? So I started kind of helping them out. And then I started eventually learning how to do stuff myself. My love affair of my silhouette came about 10 years ago, about 2008, when I got my first one, a Silhouette SD. And the first thing I kind of did with it is I figured out how to hack it to make it cut stuff that I wanted it to cut and not just the stuff that came preloaded. And I started making bookmarks. And then I started learning how to do vector art, and I started making Animal Crossing stationery, which is something that I still sell now. And that's sort of where it got started. As far as like the bigger paper crafting goes, that was a longer process. A lot of it was just me sort of playing around, figuring out what I could do between the vectors and between the paper, and sort of learning about, okay, well, how do you layer things properly? Like, how do you have to build a structure so that way it will all sort of support itself once the piece is all done? And I just kind of kept going with it. And a big part of that is I've been involved in a bunch of charity events. While my website has Desert Bus 8 is the first thing listed, my very first Desert Bus was Desert Bus 6, where I had this little shadowbox I'd made of a little chibi version of Shell from Portal 2. And for the life of me, I could not get it to sell. It was like, I put it up for like $45, and no one seemed to be interested in it. And then my girlfriend, Oren, told me, hey, Desert Bus, they're looking for people to donate items for. Do you have anything? And I was like, well, I guess I'll give them this shadow box. Maybe they can do something with it. And it went for auction for like $250. And that was when I was like, oh my God, I can like make cool things and I can give them away. But like, it was great because it's like, cool, I actually have like a place to put like all the ideas that I didn't think anyone would like have like enough to pay me for. And that's part of the reason why I've come to really love charity events, because it's like I can just make what I feel like. And then I know kind of no matter what I do, it will do some good in the world. And so that's why I've become like so involved in different charity events and donating and making all sorts of weird esoteric things that are sometimes out of the realm of what I do for my day-to-day stuff.
So you've mentioned Desert Bus and
yes,
loosely your affiliation with the RPG Valkyries, who I think the listeners of this podcast are very well familiar with now. What other groups do you work with and what kind of stuff do you do?
So Desert Bus for Hope is the event I've worked with the longest. Unfortunately, this year I took a break, but that was mainly because I got involved with the RPG Valkyries and with the Final Fantasy IV Free Enterprise community, and ended up as an admin in both communities at the same time. And but I'm hoping to be able to come back next year and be able to do something really fantastic. I have like plans that are set aside. I've worked with the Speed Gamers. Like they're sort of like a comedic speedrunning group, and they've done a bunch of different charity events based around like different game series. And I did stuff for their Final Fantasy marathon and their last Zelda marathon. And I donated for the first time to GDQ this year. So I donated to SGDQ. I did a standee of Terra from Final Fantasy VI in honor of Poexel's run.
I tried to win that. I didn't, but I tried.
Well, thank you. And then with I donated a bunch to RPG Limit Break. I donated a bunch to RPG Chickathon and obviously to Speedrun Ragnarok. So I've done like a bunch of different things this year, and that's been great. I kind of came into this year wanting to learn how to speedrun and to get involved with more gaming charity events, and those two things are very closely entwined. So I'm very glad that I was able to kind of make my goal.
Just for some clarity, RPG Limit Break and RPG Chickathon were also speedrunning events. Logically focused around RPGs. For those of our listeners who aren't super tuned into the speedrunning scene, if you do want to know more about speedrunning, go listen to episode 0, wink wink, nudge nudge.
It's a good episode.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun recording it. So I understand that you are in a relationship, and well, this is really a relationship drama podcast. I understand that your partner is also an artist. So I'm kind of curious what the dynamic is there if you two like work together on projects. Like what sort of like wholesome queer couples crafting do you two get up to? And wow, that sounds like a euphemism, but I promise I mean incredibly literal.
So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Oren. Oren is my we're long-distance, long-time partners. So we live in 2 different states, but we've been able to get together several times throughout our relationship. So a lot of it is us sort of going back and forth across the internet and being like, oh my God, this project is impossible. But then the other one will be like, no, but you can do it. I have faith in you. We've had the chance to table together, I think only twice, up at Anime Boston, which is up closer to where Oren lives, which has been a lot of fun. Tabling together is a really great experience. I've had the chance to do it with friends as well. So it's definitely something that builds a lot of community, and obviously you have to trust who like your table partner is, which obviously with Oren I do a lot. Oren has been busy over this past year, had her own Desert Bus project, working pretty much for about 10 months straight on a turkey-sized hand-crocheted plush chocobo.
Sounds amazing. I want it.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing and beautiful. And her name is Sable, because Oren names all her chocobos. Like once a year, she'll make a ridiculous chocobo, and it's beautiful.
I love it.
Would we be able to get a picture of that for my own curiosity and the show notes?
Yes!
Oh my god, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's the size of a turkey. But we both started crafting like professionally around the same time, both around about 2009 when we both started our Etsy shops. Though we go into very different directions. The big thing that she does is bead weaving. She's done like a whole variety of different absolutely beautiful projects, and she's done even some like chainmail projects, different sort of like wire wrapping projects. But a lot of it is just that we just send each other different crafting gifts, and it's always sort of like, well, this is a thing that I don't know if it would work for anyone else, but I made it for you, and that makes it special. So I have a couple different beaded pendants that she's made for me, and I've sent her like a bunch of different t-shirts with basically whatever like silly idea that she wants on them. I'm like, you get girlfriend privileges, you get to basically have whatever you want. And it's really a nice sort of relationship to have, because a lot of it is we come from very similar places and we run kind of in parallel to each other. So even though there's slight variances on what we do and the things we make, we still kind of understand the same sort of ethos that we have.
That's so wholesome, and I love it. My heart is
Thank you.
full right now.
Aw.
Haley, what am I getting from your girlfriend privileges exactly?
When you have a hard time with a speed game, I tell you to give up, nerd.
Yeah, sounds like a pretty good deal. I mean, I would do the same for you, and nothing more at all whatsoever. So, I think it works out.
So, how do you decide what to make?
That's actually a really good question. A lot of it is whatever I'm hyperfixated on at the moment. That's why you see, if you go to my regular shop, craftedwithzeal.etsy.com, there's a lot of Final Fantasy 15 because I was super duper obsessed with that game and just figuring out like, okay, how does the iconography work? How do you do the different like weird fonts that they use in that game? And so a lot of my stuff comes from that. I've been involved in a couple of different fandom celebration weeks. So this will happen sometimes on Twitter, sometimes on Tumblr, where fans will basically set aside a week or sometimes it's just a weekend and be like, okay, everyone use the same hashtag. We're all going to post stuff inspired by like this game or this character or this ship, and we're going to make all sorts of fun things. And I participated in 3 of the 4 Final Fantasy 15 weeks, and a lot of that was sort of my prototyping for different projects. That is really what got me into making t-shirts. One of the prompts was to do something inspired by the fashion of Final Fantasy 15. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I bet I can make Noctis's shirt if I try really hard. And then I did. And then a lot of people were like, can I buy this from you? And I'm like, give me like a little bit of time to figure out if I can do that for a lot of people. Because the first one had, I think, if you've never seen Noctis's t-shirt, it is a black t-shirt, and it just has the skull pattern that starts around the collar and then goes all the way down the shirt. And the original version had about 200 skulls on it, and which made my poor machine very upset with me. So I refined it. I made the skulls a lot bigger. So now it's about 50 skulls on the ones that I make every day for people. Sometimes it's been inspired by friends because I have had friends who wanted to do cosplay. And they're like one thing I did was I did pendants for Akechi from Persona 5 from his dancing outfit. And because I had a friend who wanted to cosplay that. And I was like, well, I can think of a way to do it. And that's kind of what got me involved with a lot of laser cutting. So while I don't have a laser cutter myself, and I wish I did, the wonderful folks over at Pinocchio, which is a laser cutting service, helped me out with that. So there's a lot of ways if you're willing to just kind of sit down and figure it out. You can kind of work with it. Charity projects, a lot of times, like with like the big shadow boxes, it's more like, okay, I want to make something that is big and over the top, and I know I can donate it. So a lot of times it just starts out with like different sketches, or I have folders that are just full of reference material. And I kind of go through it and figure out, okay, how do I make this thing happen? And it takes a lot of time. I don't log the amount of time my projects take, especially the big ones, because it's easily hundreds of hours. But it's super cool when you make something that you're really, really happy with and something that ends up doing good in the world.
So 2 quick questions. First, what exactly is a shadowbox?
Sure. So a shadow box is usually it's a large frame that's usually about at least a few inches deep. Usually it's deep enough that it can stand up on its own. And then there's different ways you can use a shadow box to decorate, like the traditional ways that you might do something like baby shadow boxes are like very popular, where it's like, the kids first like booties and their little like a onesie and everything to kind of, celebrate, yay, we had a baby. But for like artistic shadow boxes, usually it's done with layers of paper is usually what is most common. And I know a couple other people who do shadow box and cut paper art that have made these. So with mine, there are usually several different layers of paper, and they all sort of form like one big design. And it's kind of nice to have like the 3D effect, because you can do different techniques. Like I use like a lot of like craft foam to sort of separate out my layers and make different elements pop. What was the other question?
So if people wanted to get involved in these fandom weeks that you mentioned, is there somewhere that they can look for like a schedule of these sorts of things, or is it different per fan base?
It's definitely different per fan base. Like I said, Final Fantasy is kind of like the one I know about the most. I know like in like the Final Fantasy 15 community, there are people who actually like run a calendar for different weeks that are going on. And usually, and this is, just because of the parts of fandom I travel in, usually it's relationship weeks is what's most common. But sometimes it's just a character week. Like right now in the Final Fantasy 7 community, there's a Sephiroth week going on. So it's just people posting like a bunch of different fan art and fanfics about Sephiroth, and I'm 100% here for it. But yeah, it's something where if you kind of are part of the community, usually you can find stuff out. Usually people will make a account specific for that event and that you can then go and follow.
So, what advice would you give to someone who is new to crafting?
Well, one thing I do, my weekend job, is that I am a kids and sort of teenage craft instructor. So I get to see lots of kids of different ages and ethnicities come into my classroom, and I sort of got to have like a little bit of time with them. Usually my classes are no more than like a half hour to an hour long, and we get to make something fun. So definitely look around at your local craft stores. A lot of them will do different classes, and some of them will be free. Some of them you might just be responsible for the supplies, but that's a really good place to get started. YouTube and Pinterest have done a really good job making crafting more available. Also, there's like a whole variety of craft blogs. The big thing I would say is find something that you are interested in and that you're willing to put a little bit of time into. And that could be a whole like range of different things. Like if you like old school video games, you can learn how to do perler art, or you could learn how to do cross stitch, because there's a whole like subsection of people who just do cross stitch based off of video games. And there's also people who do like cross stitch of like kind of like witty phrases and everything. So that's, just sort of find something that kind of resonates with you would be my main goal. And then sort of from there, you can then figure out, okay, what kind of materials do I need? What kind of techniques do I need to learn? And just sort of take it like one step at a time. But pretty much no matter what you want to make, there's going to be someone out there who'll be willing to teach you.
So, how much of a central community is there to crafting?
That's hard to tell. I mean, a lot of it for people who are professional, a lot of it's centered around Etsy, which, if you don't know, Etsy is an online marketplace for people who make crafts to sell directly to those who want to buy their crafts. Etsy has its own forums. You can join Etsy teams if you would like to. And from there, you can connect with other professional crafters. Forums, I find, are a little harder to get connected on, but can sometimes have good experiences with teams, which are a little bit more focused. So you can find teams, for example, like, just for people who do like sell like sort of fan merch inspired stuff. There's also a lot of different Facebook groups. I know that there is a Facebook group for Artist Alley sellers, because something that's become more common now for people who do Artist Alley is to outsource portions of their work. So I've only done it once. I've done it for bookbinding. So I got together with a whole bunch of other artists, and it was organized by one person. In this case, it was organized by the wonderful New World Xteen, who they help organize like a couple of these during the course of the year. And everyone kind of gives their printing files, and then it gets done overseas, and then we kind of get all of our books shipped. And then from there, you can sell your books, and they're all kind of nice and professionally done. So there is organization for that. So often, if you are doing sort of like the Artist Alley selling, usually at different cons, they might have like a forum, and they might have like a subsection just for people who are on Artist Alley. And there are a lot of artists who are on Twitter and who are on Tumblr, and sort of by looking around in the different hashtags, especially on Tumblr, you can find different people who do stuff that is similar to yours. So, like, I follow several other people who do fan merch. I follow people who do paper crafting. Even though I don't do cross-stitch currently, I used to do cross-stitching, so I follow a couple different cross-stitching accounts. And from there, you can kind of learn, okay, what are people doing? What sort of things are people interested in? It really is like all available for you. You do have to do maybe a little bit of hunting around, but it's not hard at all.
How queer-friendly would you say the community is? And, you can sort of take this in layers, like the community around you and then the wider community as a whole.
Right. So kind of going back to what Jazz talked about in the cosplay episode, I'm like so happy that there's sort of been this queering of con space. So a lot of the different anime and video game conventions tend to actually have like at least a decent amount of queer friendliness, but like it's like way stronger if you are actually in the Artist Alley. A lot of Artist Alley is an outgrowth of the sort of creative side of fandom culture, which tends to be heavily femme and heavily queer. So that's like, it's a pretty good safe place. I know I've never had like any issues or anything, and I've had people who've come up to me from like several different, types of, orientations and genders, and we all kind of like, you understand that you're cool about it. I do have a story, so it's a very short story, but it was a couple of years ago. I was on the other side of the table, so that means I was off like shopping around, and I ran into the really cool queer crafting collective, Nightingale Needles. It is a polyamorous queer triad that goes around to different conventions, and they sell a lot of beautiful Pride and fandom merch. And I was admiring one of their pieces, and I was like, oh, can I take a picture for my friend? And then I stopped myself, and I'm like, wait, why are you closeting yourself in this moment? If you can't be out and open with these people, you can't not be out and open like at all. So I like immediately corrected myself, like, no, this is for my girlfriend. And then I went and I bought one of their adorable little bi Pride kitties.
Okay. Real talk. When is somebody writing slightly sci-fi, like fantasy drama novel about a polyamorous crafting triad? Because oh my god, that would be so good.
I would read it.
Looking at you, Xandra. Looking at you.
I mean, there are definitely like zine culture has become a thing again, which I'm super duper excited about. There's always cool things going on. I've supported like a bunch of queer like comic book and short story like Kickstarters and everything. So there's definitely room, and there's definitely people out there who probably would love to write that story. But it's very different when I go into a space that is crafting first. I went to a crafting convention about 2 years ago, and it was a very different experience because like I'm in my 30s and I was like one of the youngest people there. And it again was a highly femme space, but it was definitely a heterosexual femme space. And it was one of those things where it was a little like jarring almost. I mean, I kind of knew what I was walking into, but at the same time I was like, oh, these are very different people that do very different things and have very different like aesthetics and ideas about what they want to do with their crafting than what I do, which was not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it was definitely a bit of an interesting experience because I'm so used to the convention culture that is around like sort of like games and anime and sci-fi and just like that whole sort of convention culture, which definitely trends more younger and queerer as well. So, but there's definitely, especially if you are getting into it from a fandom side, you will 100% find plenty of fellow queer crafters and artists out there who will be super excited that you are a fan of their work.
Cool. So we're going to move on to our performance showcase in just a second. But first, I would like to note that you just described yourself as having seen the zine scene.
Yes!
And with that, let's move into our performance showcase. Kaylee, what are we performance showcasing today?
So this performance showcase is a little special because we actually have the items that we actually have multiple items here that we're going to talk about. Schala sent us a few things, including a Setting the Record Queer coaster, custom made for the podcast, which is so cool. And they're absolutely there already are pictures, even as we're recording this, of this stuff everywhere, but all of them will also be in the show notes. So we have that coaster. I am currently wearing a t-shirt that is the demo shirt that used for a Speedrun Ragnarok prize. And Alexis got a Mega Man face magnet that is really cool.
I'm also wearing a Schala design. Actually, I'm wearing the Speedrun's Ragnarok, or Speedrun. Let me check my shirt. Speedrun, singular, Ragnarok logo. So, Schala, we've got, I guess, 4 things to talk about then. What do you want to start with?
We can start with the coasters.
All right, let's start with the coasters. So to describe these things, they're freaking gorgeous, first of all. But it's basically just like a transparent plastic coaster, and it has, Setting the Record Queer written in our particular font. And the letters are like nice and solid and not pixelated or anything like that. And also the word queer is in rainbow. And frankly, I don't know why I didn't think of that sooner. That's genius. So, Schala, how did you make these wonderful things that you bribed us with to be on our podcast?
After we invited you.
After we invited you. Schala is a time-traveling podcast briber.
That makes sense. I can get behind that. So the way the coasters are made, that was actually one of the things I learned about when I was at the crafting convention. There was a option to do a coaster making workshop, and I was like, okay, I'll go and find out how to make coasters. So you start with your base. So the base is laser cut acrylic, and I buy them. It's actually in this sort of like the way that this convention worked, the people putting on the workshop are also the people who could sell you the supplies. But it comes from a small laser cutting company called Craft Chameleon. So I bought some blank coasters from them. And then to get the font right, I went in and I went to Twitter and I took a screenshot of the banner and then I ran it through the Font Squirrel Font Maturator, which is a free program. And if you give it an image, it will try to help you figure out what the font is in that image.
You could have just asked, right? That's a thing you could have done.
Yeah, but I want to surprise y'all.
Fair enough. You did succeed at that. We were surprised and very, very pleased.
I like the font, by the way.
I spent 2 hours looking at fonts and discussing with Cubotic, so I'm glad you like it. We were a big fan of it too, because trying to find, this is sort of a tangent, but trying to find a font that looks like, graffiti or stencil text that's also accessibly readable, not an easy task, but eventually we managed it.
And if anyone else wants to know the font is Pack In with a little apostrophe.
It sure is. Thank you for revealing our podcast secrets.
Oh no, we're going to be out of business.
It's just such a good font, though, and other people should know.
It's a really nice font. So anyways, how did you go from finding a font and having a coaster base to putting text on it and stuff?
So the text is done with vinyl. This particular vinyl is called Oracal 651. It's used for car decals mostly, but you can use it for a variety of different crafts, usually applying it to plastics. So I sort of sat down with the logo. I had it open in Inkscape, which is the program that I do for my vector work. And Inkscape is a completely free program, open to anyone who wants to learn how to do vectors. And so I sat down with the text and I sort of very carefully lined it all up and made sure that everything looked okay. To do the different colors for queer, what you can do with a lot of vinyl work is you can do registration marks. So usually it's a small shape that you repeat a couple of times to help you line up different elements because you're going to be cutting everything separately. So I did registration marks so I could line up all the letters in queer because I would be cutting each one of them separately. So I did cut the white text, and there was actually originally was a white registration mark that goes around the edge of the coaster that helps me line it up. And then I went through and I cut each color in turn. So I cut my red Q, the orange U, and then the yellow and green E's, and then the blue R. And then sort of very carefully, when you're working with vinyl, you have a solid sheet of vinyl, and then you remove everything that you don't need from the design in a process we call weeding. So you have a little weeding tool. Kind of looks like a dentist, the little scraper they kind of use, the little like super duper sharp one. And then you just use that, and you peel away all the vinyl that you don't need. After that, you use what's called transfer tape. It's a clear tape that can pick up the vinyl, and then you can then attach it to wherever you're going to attach it to. So I use that to then pick up the white, and then sort of go like do each letter one at a time, picking it up from the cut vinyl. And then you apply it upside down and backwards. So that way, when you actually are using the coaster, the vinyl is applied to the bottom of the coaster. So that way it won't get wet or anything. So if you actually flip your coaster over, you can feel where the vinyl is.
So it is. Fascinating.
And then you just attach the little bumpets. That's what the little like feet are called. And you make sure that all your registration marks have been removed because they were vinyl at 1.2. And that's how you make a coaster.
Cool. All right, round 2. What's next?
We can do the t-shirt, the one that Kaylee is wearing. So
Yay.
This was the demo shirt for Speedrun Ragnarok for our Mother 3 prize. So it is a DCMC, so Desperado Crush Mambo Combo t-shirt, which is a band in the game. And one of the things I thought was really cool is that if you have the band's merch in the game, you can use it to distract enemies, and that's like a key part of the speedrun. So I thought it was very cool to make that a real thing. So I went looking around at a bunch of different fonts, there's a lot of looking at fonts in this job. And I found one that had nice, big, chunky letters to do the DCMC logo. And then I had a more calligraphy font to do the smaller text for the band's name. And then on the back, it has speech balloons that have the two different greetings and the greeting and the goodbye that the band uses. So I did my homework on it.
No kidding.
So heat transfer vinyl, this particular brand I use is called Caesar Easy Weed, which I know is just like a very silly name.
Just a little bit?
Just a little?
Go on.
That's okay. So this was done in their standard gold and then their electric red are the two colors that I use. And again, it's pretty much a very similar process to making the coaster with the Oracal. You're cutting the design out of a solid sheet and then you're removing everything that you don't need with your weeding tool. But for heat transfer vinyl, all the vinyl remains stuck to its own liner, which is also very sticky. And then from that, you can attach it. Like you can put it on top of whatever clothing or other item that you might be pressing, and it will have a decent amount of tack against the fabric. Then what you do to actually apply it is you put it through a heat press. If you don't have a heat press, you can use an iron, but you're not going to get as good of a result. So I have what's called a clamshell heat press. So it has a bed at the bottom, and then the heating element clamps down on top to actually give it enough heat and pressure to apply to the shirt.
Thank you for adding the sound effect there. I really appreciate it. Really adding a whole new dimension to this podcast.
It's a super loud machine.
When is episode 7 professional crafting Foley effects with SchalaKitty?
I would, trust me, I could record the sound of it. It's very noisy, but it gets the job done. Like mine weighs about 50 pounds and yeah, and you have to calibrate it and all this. Mine's already been calibrated for my weird method where I have a Teflon covered foam sheet that is on top of my solid cold platen, so that way I can press stuff like aprons and get all the way up to the collars of shirts and not have to worry about it. But anyway, you press it for about 20 seconds at 310 degrees to actually get it to stick. And then for when you're layering, you sort of do one press first, and then at about half the time, about 10 seconds, and then you layer on the second color after that. I don't do too much of color layering, even though I'm wearing something right now that has color layering, as does Kaylee. But it's a lot of fun when you get it to come out looking really cool. Yeah, so that's how you make a shirt with a heat transfer design on it.
Cool. How about for round 3, you talk about the t-shirt that I'm wearing. So I'm wearing a shirt with the Speedrun Ragnarok logo. So given the fact that I ordered this shirt from Teespring, I assume you didn't make the physical t-shirt. So why don't you walk us through the process of designing this logo?
Oh boy, that's a
This
story.
logo, I guess to kind of actually, how would you describe this logo since you made it?
So, Speedrun Ragnarok, we actually went through several different possible names for the marathon before that's what we settled on. So, here we'll pull back the curtain a little bit. So, here are the other possible names for Speedrun Ragnarok.
Oh boy. Inside the RPG Valkyries on Setting the Record Queer.
I didn't know any of this.
The other possible names were Bifrost Runners, Runners of the Nine Realms, and Under the Yggdrasil. So I tried very much to stay within the Norse mythology sort of subset. But Speedrun Ragnarok, we thought, had the best sound to it.
It's a good name.
It's a good name. So I went through several different variations on the logo, incorporating different mythological elements from mythological creatures from Norse mythology, before eventually settling on, and hopefully I can pronounce this right, Jorgamundr, the Midgard serpent. And that ended up being our mascot, and that's what we have on the t-shirt. So it was all done in Inkscape again. So that's my vector program, going very slowly to kind of for the face I had done a sketch for. And the controller I had also done a sketch for. And my sketches ended up being very much inspired by knotwork, both traditional Nordic knotwork as well as a little bit of pull from Celtic knotwork, just because that tends to be a bit cleaner in its lines. But trust me, I looked at like so many different variations of Nordic knotwork in putting this together. So it started with the controller.
Yeah, just so for some context on like how everything fits together in design, and this will be in the show notes. Go take a look. I took a cute selfie in this shirt, and I'm real proud of it. So go look at maybe my face, but like definitely Schala's artwork. You essentially have this creature, this serpent that I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of. Definitely not because I've already forgotten it at all whatsoever. Kind of like the serpentine body round, and then you have the face on top, and superimposed. Not really superimposed over it, but kind of tied into this, this like knotwork look, is the face buttons of a Super Nintendo controller, which as a retro controller snob and religious follower of the Super Nintendo controller, I appreciate. But continue.
Yeah, so, and what I actually might do for y'all is I have to see if I have the files still, but I might have like old sketch files and stuff to kind of...
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, so we'll see if we can get that into the show notes, sketch files and raw files of the logo itself. So I started with the controller, which was all knotwork that I came up with to integrate in both the directional pad and also the A, B, X, and Y buttons are all sort of part of their own design. And then we have like in the middle where we have the start and select buttons. And then the next part was then doing the serpent's face. And then the final part was doing the big curve of the serpent, which was done using Inkscape's ability to repeat patterns along a line. So I had to do the first sort of like 2 rows of scales and then have it repeat and make the full circle. And then I went in and very carefully, if you look at it carefully, which scale is in the middle switches like every few lines. So it is a lot of work that went into it. And then I found a rune inspired font that I use as the basis for the actual text base of the logo. And then all the knotwork was actually brought in as well to when we did the overlay for the marathon. The overlay for the marathon was pretty much entirely based around like a grid-based system, and all the edges were also different knotwork designs. So I did my best to try and carry the theme like all throughout, and we kind of tie that in. It was a very much like a stone look. I wanted it to look very much like the old rune stones that you see in Nordic art. So it was a lot of theming that actually went into the marathon.
Well, I mean, I think it turned out quite nicely. I'm very much enjoying wearing this t-shirt.
Oh, I'm glad.
Not the least reason of which is that it's comfy, but it's also very pretty. So then the final thing you time travel bribed us with, you made me a little like Mega Man face magnet.
Yeah.
And so it's the 1-up sprite from the NES games. And like any good craft, just so you know, it has been placed on the refrigerator.
Yay! Oh, good.
But yeah, it's basically just the sprite of the Mega Man 1-up with, except, all the different colored pieces are actually like, three-dimensionally textured a little bit. So yeah, can you talk us through how you made that?
Sure. So I've done a couple of times. I've done going from sprite to paper art. What you have to start with is you get like your original sprite, and then you bring it into Photoshop, and you basically, I think I made it about, I zoomed it up to about 16,000%. I make it really big. And then I take that image and then I sort of separate out all the colors that I need. Luckily for like 8-bit stuff, you usually don't need a lot of colors. Usually, I think for Mega Man, it was just black, white, the 2 shades of blue, and then the skin tone.
Yep.
So I separated each one of those out, and then I took that and I imported it into Inkscape, and Inkscape has a bitmap trace feature. I don't use it too much. I like to hand draw my vectors, which, believe it or not, are all done with a mouse.
Color me impressed.
Because that's how I learned. I learned to do it with a mouse. And while I can do it with a tablet, I do have like a small Wacom tablet. I just really like working with my mouse. So pretty much all my stuff is done that way. But yeah, so I separate out all the colors. I did a quick vector trace on them to get like the nice sharp lines and everything. And then I brought it over to my silhouette and it cut out different shades of cardstock. I actually have a huge collection of colorful cardstock. I call them my rainbow draws, and they're just full of just pretty much any color I can find. I've been collecting for like a couple of years, and I have at least like 5 to 10 sheets of any color I might need. And then it's all glued together with I like Tombow glue a lot because it's nicer than a lot of other white glues, and it has a good amount of stick to it. So it's all done with then to sort of like carefully placed together. I sort of started with the edges and worked my way inward to get the whole design together. And then on the back, I glued on 2 rare earth neodymium magnets. So it's a super duper strong magnet. And that's why I said, I included the little note. I'm like, please don't pull me directly because I don't want the magnets to come off. Just gently slide and it will come right off gently. So that's how that got made. But I've done like a whole bunch of different paper pieces.
I think it's really impressive how we come to this performance showcase and it's like, yeah, this is crafting, but you just told us about 4 completely different things that you do. And it's really impressive how it's like, it seems like it's one thing, but it's not one thing. Galaxy brain, Joshua brain.
I mean...
Shoutouts to The World Ends With You.
Yeah, but a lot of the stuff that I do, it starts as vector art, which I am entirely self-taught in for... again, about like 10 years now. I just started playing around with it, originally because I needed to look at clip art. And I was like, well, how do I look at this vector clip art? Well, there's a free program that lets you look at it. And I sort of, from there, started working backwards to figure out, like, okay, how does it all fit together? How do you make different stuff work? And that's sort of like what got started. And I like... While I don't have the chance to work with paper a lot, I like working with it because it's such a fun medium and you can do a lot of stuff with it. I've also really liked working with acrylic, like laser cut acrylic a lot. And that was, like, for example, the Terra standee was 100% laser cut acrylic and then just adhered together with plastic cement.
Cool. So let's move on to some of our listener questions. So for every episode of this podcast, we take your questions to give to our guests and to ourselves. As a reminder, you can ask Kaylee and I questions, no matter how silly they are. We're happy to probably answer them. We take these questions from Twitter at STRQueercast, via email, settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, and in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/STRQcord. Our first question for this week is from Violet Moon. What's the most of your soul you've ever put into something you made? Now, this can be metaphorical, like you put a lot of effort into it, or this could be literal if you're making Horcruxes to prevent yourself from ever dying.
I mean, if I do have a Horcrux, it is 1000% the Final Fantasy shadowbox I did for Desert Bus for Hope 9. That is the thing I put the most of my heart and soul into. To describe it, It is a 11 by 14 inch shadow box, about 3 inches deep, and was made of 1,000 pieces of individually cut paper.
Holy moly.
That depict the main summons of Final Fantasy. So up at the top, you have Bahamut, and then below that, there is Ifrit and Shiva, and then below them, you have Titan and Rama, and then at the very bottom, there is Leviathan and Odin, and up in the top corners, there's a Chocobo and a Moogle. And it is like, if I had to pick like one piece that is like me, it's that one. Like on the header of my art blog on Tumblr, that's the image that I have. And it was a multi-week process of getting it put together. It was definitely the most challenging piece I've ever made. I had to figure out a lot of techniques for it, kind of like on the fly. And it was, I think, my favorite. Like, if I had to pick like one aesthetic to work in, that faux stained glass aesthetic would be the one I would pick. And so, yeah, that's definitely the piece I put the most of myself into. And I was actually very sad to give it away, but then it ended up raising like $6,000. And I was like, okay, I'm very happy I gave it away.
I used to, for a little bit of personal history, I actually used to do like comics, like I would draw them. And so I used to work on 11 by 14 paper, and just trying to imagine like taking that size of canvas and doing the whole thing in individually cut smaller pieces of paper is a terrifying premise. So good job. Our next question for this week is from Tentatively Game on Twitter. What is your favorite character or subject to craft things of?
Definitely, again, it's Final Fantasy. That's like kind of like my home series. One thing that I ended up doing several times and in several different ways was the main emblem of Lucius from Final Fantasy 15. I have a couple different versions of it. I'll have a link probably to the t-shirt version, which is a beautiful geometric design.
Ooh, shiny.
It's very shiny. I love it a lot. And it's just made up of these sort of different geometric elements. And it appears in the game several different times. It's like built into the menus of the game. It's the flag of the country. And it's this emblem and this iconography that I really, really enjoy. So I sell it as like a t-shirt. This is probably going to be ever so slightly noisy because this was an old convention bag that I had for a few years. So, which was me experimenting with.
Oh, that one's even shinier.
With the holographic vinyl. But yeah, Final Fantasy 15 was like a big fixation for me for a while. So I think out of anything I did, I think that's the series I've done the most for. After that, I think I did the most for Tiger and Bunny, which I think still is my favorite anime series. If you've never seen it, it's about a group of superheroes who are also on reality TV that shows off their hero exploits. And the show has a lot of really like strong design elements. There's different like logos for like all the heroes. And I did like when that show was airing, I think I did several different projects like based around like the logo of the TV show, the logo of my favorite heroes, even stuff inspired by like the villains of the series. So, but yeah, it's a lot of it is like, what am I like super duper into at the time? And that's probably what I'll end up doing. But Final Fantasy is kind of what I often come back to.
Final Fantasy is a fun video game series.
It's my home series. Like that's even like how like Orn and I met. We met through Final Fantasy.
I'm trying to think the longest time I've ever spent playing a Final Fantasy game, and I feel like I'm about to get disowned from my own podcast. I think I spent like an hour or two playing Final Fantasy 13.
Get out.
With an X at one point. I think that's been about it.
You're not a big RPG person.
No, not
that's
big.
Okay. You like what you like, and that's the important thing. So for me, it's always been Final Fantasy.
Anyway, I think it's time to move into our final segment on the podcast, which is Kaylee's Question of the Week. Every week, I ask a pretty normal question, pretty standard, like things that you would see on like, a job application, I think.
I would 100% be down with any job application that included one of your questions.
Same.
The question this week is, if you were to be made of one craft material, what would you be made out of?
All right, so right away, I am torn between plush or metal. No in between. The softest thing or the hardest thing. I might need some time to think about that, so Kaylee?
Pipe cleaners.
pipe cleaners. There are people who do absolutely amazing work with pipe cleaners. If you've never seen like really high-end pipe cleaner sculpture, it is actually an amazing art form, and I totally respect anyone who does it. Nah, I'd have to be my first love. I would have to be made out of cardstock. Absolutely. I don't actually. That's true. I actually have never made a Scala-based design. I should make a Scala-based design and just do it out of cardstock. And there you go. That'll be something new. That'll be a new Horcrux I can put my soul into.
Nice. The strats.
The strats.
Nobody will ever suspect it, except for all of the people who listen to this podcast where you said that's what you were going to do. You better hope the hero that rises up to defeat you when you become an evil villainess doesn't like podcasts.
All you have to do is put your soul into the Voldemort-shaped ones and you're done.
It's the last place people would ever expect.
Exactly.
All right, well... Oh, I guess I have to actually come up with an answer. Plush metal. Plush metal. I don't know. I can't decide.
I would
Both.
say... I mean, what you could do is there's a lot of like really beautiful metallic fabrics that I've seen to do like robot plushes. Like I have like a Servbot that's made out of vinyl, and it's like metallic vinyl. It's very cool.
Okay, yeah, sold that. I like Servbots. They're adorable. Okay, well, I think that's about it. Schala, thank you so much for coming on this podcast and bringing us all sorts of wonderful bribes. I mean, gifts. Of your wonderful, wonderful crafting work. If people want to find more of you and more of your work and the things you do, where can they do that?
The best place to find me is on Etsy. I am Crafted with Zeal, no spaces in between, .etsy.com. And actually, when this podcast is going to be released, I'll be in the middle of the generic early winter holiday sale that me and Oren put on. So
generic early winter holiday.
It's for everybody. It's, where we put both of our shops are on sale for like 2 weeks in November, and it's the best time to buy from either of us. You can find me, my portfolio website is craftedwithzeal.net, and you can find me on Twitter and on Tumblr, both as SchalaKitty, no spaces in between, SCHALAKITTY, SchalaKitty.
Cool. If you like this podcast, which I hope you did, I know I did. This has been a very entertaining episode to record. You can find us on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. If there's somewhere that you'd like to be listening to this podcast, but you can't because it isn't there, first, have you tried harder? Second, if you tried as hard as you could and you still couldn't succeed, that's okay. We still love you. Shoot us a Twitter or an email or a Discord letting us know where you'd like to see this podcast. While you're contacting us, which you can do again on Twitter at STRQueercast, email settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, and Discord bit.ly/STRQcord. In that Discord, you can hang out with a bunch of Setting the Record Queer listeners, your two hosts, and a bunch of your guests and production peoples who have helped out with this podcast. While you're there, if you have questions for us or our future guests, or answers to Kaylee's question of the week, send those over and they might get featured on the next episode of the podcast. If you have feedback for the show, please send that. And while you're around, be sure to leave a review and, talk about us on your social media, tell a friend. All that stuff's really, really helpful to helping us grow as a podcast. Our logo was done by Cubotic, that's QBTIC on Twitter, and Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. Our theme music was done by Thrill Me Music. You can find more information about Thrill Me Music at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. This podcast was edited by Kaylee and produced by yours truly, Alexis. Kaylee, where can the people find you?
People can find me on Twitter at WitchesHex, that's WITCHS Hex, or on Twitch with the same name, but an underscore between witches and hex.
And you can find me on Twitch and YouTube as Proto Magical Girl, or Twitch at proto.ml, and on Twitter and Instagram as Princess Proto. Now, with all that said and done, we actually have a little bit of an announcement. So we've been doing this podcast for quite a while now, and we are, when this episode releases, we are going to be opening a Patreon, because we really like doing this podcast. We're having a lot of fun. It's also a lot of work, and we would like to be able to spend more time, doing the podcast and less time doing the editing. Just for a little bit of perspective, a little bit of backstage magic. Each of these episodes takes upwards of 10 hours between recording, planning, prepping, contacting guests, editing, mixing, mastering, social media, setting it up for distribution, etc. And we're hoping with a Patreon, we can, in the future, offload the cost of hosting and potentially down the line be able to afford a third-party editor for this podcast. If we can get that far, we would be able to start doing more episodes and bonus content and stuff like that. So if you go to patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer and are generous enough to throw us a couple bucks, depending on what tier you choose, patrons are going to be able to get access to high-quality downloads of episodes, early episodes, and the most generous among the patrons can even get their names featured on every episode of the podcast that they donate to support. So please, if you like our show, throw us a dime, maybe a couple dimes. Whatever you can helps. Check the Patreon page for more information on like goals and the tiers and stuff like that. Patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer. And our favorite answer to last week's Kaylee's question of the week, which was,
which historical figure would you be in a band with?
That one is actually from SchalaKitty. Schala didn't tell us her answer, but Schala, what do you got for us?
My answer would be Mademoiselle Maupin, who was a French opera singer kind of at the end of the 1600s, at the beginning of the 1700s. And she was basically the original disaster buy. She was known for doing all sorts of things where, like, her girlfriend got sent to a convent. So she snuck into the convent, kidnapped her girlfriend, and then burned down the convent. Or she was at a ball and kissed another lady. And then, like, 3 French noblemen immediately challenged her to a duel. And she outdueled all of them because she was also a professional fencer. And she was known for having one of the most beautiful voices of the Parisian opera. And if you're going to pick someone to be in a band with, pick someone who can sing and who also can fight anyone who gets in the way of your band. And she just seems like a really cool person who lived her very short life as dramatically as possible. So that's who I would pick to be in a band with.
No kidding. So that's all for this episode of Setting the Record Queer. Thank you so much, Schala, for coming on and telling us about all of the wonderful stuff that you do and coming on like maybe a little bit more knowledgeable about this podcast than even the two of us are. We really appreciate it. We will see y'all for next episode in about 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.